Who are we waiting for? Joe?
We're waiting for everybody. No, everybody's waiting for me. I'm here. The party can start.
The world waits for Joe.
Do you know how many Joes it takes to screw in a light bulb?
1.
Exactly. I just hold it up and the world revolves around me.
Boom.
This episode is sponsored by Front End Masters. They have a terrific lineup of live courses you can attend either online or in person. They also have a terrific backlog of courses you can watch, including JavaScript The Good Parts, Build Web Applications with Node.js, AngularJS in Depth, and Advanced JavaScript. You can go check them out at frontendmasters.com. This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Every week on Hired, they run an auction where over 1,000 tech companies in San Francisco, New York, and LA bid on JavaScript developers, providing them with salary and equity up front. The average JavaScript developer gets an average of 5 to 15 introductory offers and an average salary of $130,000 a year. Users can either accept an offer and go right into interviewing with the company or deny them without any continuing obligations. It's totally free for users, and when you're hired, they give you a $2,000 bonus as a thank you for using them. But if you use the JavaScript Jabber link, you'll get a $4,000 bonus instead. Finally, if you're not looking for a job but know someone who is, you can refer them to Hired and get a $1,337 bonus if they accept the job. Go sign up at hired.com/JavaScriptJabber. This episode is sponsored by Widmo5, a brand new generation of JavaScript controls. A pretty amazing line of HTML5 and JavaScript products for enterprise application development in that Widmo5 leverages ECMAScript 5 and each control ships with AngularJS directives. Check out the faster, lighter, and more mobile Widmo5. This episode is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean is the provider I use to host all of my creations. All the shows are hosted there, along with any other projects I come up with. Their user interface is simple and easy to use, their support is excellent, and their VPSs are backed on solid-state drives and are fast and responsive. Check them out at DigitalOcean.com. If you use the code JavaScriptJabber, you'll get a $10 credit. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 183 of the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have Joe Eames.
Hey everybody.
Aimee Knight.
Hello.
Jamison Dance.
Hello, friends.
Dave Smith.
Yep.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. Quick announcement, I have the page up for JS Remote Conf, so go check it out. This week we're going to be talking about whether or not you need a college degree. And I think there's probably some nuance to this conversation. But I kind of want to go around the horn real quick and see just briefly if you could say yes, no, or it depends, and a brief statement of why, whether or not you think that somebody should get a college degree, maybe in computer science, if they're interested in being a programmer.
Can we find out first who has a college degree on the panel?
Sure.
In general or in computer science?
If you have a college degree, tell us what it's in.
Campus wildlife.
I want that degree.
Do you feed the trash can cats?
I could just see Dave Smith walking around U of U campus or something with an Australian accent.
Why? Why Australian?
A video, taking video.
Or because of Steve Irwin.
Yeah.
I almost said crocodile.
This is a very rare specimen.
Pretty good.
All right. Well, I can start this off.
No one actually answered.
I have a bachelor's degree in computer engineering,
which we like to call remedial computer science.
Oh gosh.
It starts already.
It's going to be one of those.
I'm scared to know what's going to happen when I say mine then.
The hardware is cool too.
This is Joe. I do not have a degree in anything.
Jamison?
I don't have a degree. I have 2 classes to finish a degree, and I've had those 2 classes for a few years now.
What were you majoring in?
It was computer science. Computer science with an emphasis in bioinformatics.
You know what, Jamison? I took 2 classes at the university, so you can have mine.
There you go. Between the two of you, you have a college degree.
Yeah.
Isn't that what a transfer is?
Yeah.
How about you, Dave?
My credits.
I have a degree. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science.
All right. And you, Aimee?
I have a bachelor's degree in mass comm, so useful, not. And the minor was in journalism. And then I started to go back to school for physical therapy for like 2 years, but decided not to do that. And then I also started to go back to school for a bachelor's in IT and decided not to do that. So that's where I stand.
All right.
So wait, what was your degree in? What comm?
Mass communications, like
Mass communication.
totally not useful.
Oh, I thought you were saying mathematics communication, which also would be a really cool degree.
And hey, wait a second. You are communicating to the masses right now.
That's right.
You are the only one with an appropriate degree.
Or in my case, I'm a massive communicator.
It is kind of a blend now.
So you got our history. You never got the answer from us, though.
Okay, so
do you need one?
Let's go back around the horn. Yeah, do you need a college degree? Dave, why don't you just tell us?
We really got to frame the context before I can answer the question. Like, for example...
this is way more
Okay,
than one word.
so this is, it depends.
Well, I mean, I was going to say that in the United States, the answer may be very different than, like, in Germany, and there's a lot more prospective computer programmers outside the U.S. than in. I think most of us only really have context for inside the U.S.
That's true.
Why don't you answer it for both the U.S. and Germany, then?
Oh, well, for Germany, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question, but I have a lot of really interesting data points that I'll share over the course of the next hour.
Okay. Joe, what do you think?
No.
Jamison?
No, with a big old asterisk next to it.
Aimee?
I'm going to say it depends as well.
Yeah, I'm firmly in the it depends camp.
I'd like to change my answer to a big old asterisk with a little no next to it.
And I will say definitely depends on CS. I'm less so on it depends on just a degree in general, but still a little it depends.
So let's talk briefly about what a degree gets you. I've known several people who had computer science degrees, or they went to a trade school and studied programming, and it made a big difference in their ability to get a job. It made a big difference in their ability to move up in the companies that they worked in. And I've known other people that don't have degrees and seem to be doing just as well. So does it depend on the person? It kind of seems like, to me at least, that's what it is what job do you want and who you are.
I think a lot of it does depend on the person. I know I didn't program until I started going to college. So even though I don't have a degree, I don't think I would have a job as a programmer if I didn't go to college and like almost get a degree. So I think you don't need it, but it sure can make something easier. There's this weird disconnect between, especially if you don't go to college, if you come into programming through a less like formal training route, like a boot camp or just teaching yourself, there's this weird disconnect between like, you know how to program and someone will hire you for your first job. I don't know how that ever happens. If you have a degree, there's this defined, or if you're in college, there's this defined pipeline to kind of shuffle you into jobs. And if you don't, it's a lot fuzzier.
You mean like there's not like a super clear path for you to necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, you can graduate from boot camp and then you kind of go interview. And if you don't get any of those first jobs, I don't know, what do? You just kind of keep interviewing and hope someone hires you. But there's not these, I mean, there are career fairs, but it's the people that come to the career fairs at school are conservative and they're kind of used to, they've been doing this for decades. They're kind of used to hiring new graduates or students out of them. And
yeah,
it's a lot messier in the boot camp or self-taught world, I think. Not worse in any way, just like a lot of people are figuring out how to handle junior. How do we provide a good environment for junior developers? Is this a company where we can even hire junior developers and not have them be miserable or like quit because we expect them to know things they don't know? And I don't know.
Yeah, I think the whole software development industry as a whole over the last 5 to 10 years has really undergone a big paradigm shift because for the first time in the industry, we're in a place where there aren't enough people to do the jobs we have. And so they're having to go to these alternative means for sourcing candidates to work for them. And they're having to make, changes to their processes and their things that have been established as tradition for 30, 40 years. Like, for example, not necessarily sourcing 100% of your candidates from the local university.
So one advantage, at least, to getting a degree is that you're in an environment that has sort of a pipeline set forward that the people who want to hire college graduates are going to come and pull people from that pool.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. And you're also in an environment where there are lots of people with part-time jobs, and those are kind of easy ways to get into programming jobs because they're used to hiring junior people or people that are less experienced.
Yeah,
and you're a student, so like most students don't have as much responsibility as far as making money and supporting other people, and some people have different circumstances, but you can kind of work these part-time jobs and get experience without needing to just immediately support yourself through a living wage, I guess.
I can jump on that. I mean, when I was attending the university here, I had a job doing IT, and I helped administrate or administration or whatever you want to call it.
Administerize is the correct term.
Gotcha. I administerized Linux servers and Windows servers at different points. I also did some netware work, but yeah, it was all sort of relevant. I didn't go directly into a programming job when I graduated, but yeah, I had plenty of experience that helped me move along in my career to where I wound up.
I would like to actually hear from each of you how you got to where you are today. And we've actually heard this a lot from Aimee. Incidentally, several times on the show, we've heard her story over the last 2 or 3 years, which I love. It's an amazing story. And I think it's actually becoming more and more representative of developers. And the traditional, classically trained computer science graduate is actually becoming, I would say, a minority among my peers and among the people I interact with. But like Joe, what was your track? How did you get to where you are today? Educationally only, please.
A bit of luck. I, unlike Jamison, programmed in my teen years, so I was lucky. I was working at a company that was doing some technical work, and I had a light technical job. Like I wasn't even doing real technician stuff. And then one other manager needed a programmer really desperately and asked my manager, and he said, I don't have one of my developers I could loan you, but I have a guy that's taken some classes because I'd taken high school and a couple of college classes. And so they handed me the Visual Fox Pro books. And this was back in the days when you'd go down and when you bought a piece of software, you only bought it physically, right? There was no internet. And
it came in a box.
It came in a box.
We knew that when you said books. Fox Pro.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody who recognizes that name will get a laugh, a kick out of it. These huge big books in a big box. And it was over a 3-day weekend. And he says, if you can do this when you come back, then I'll hire you to work for me. And it was supposed to be like a loan, but very quickly I became just a full-time programmer for him. So there was definitely a lot of luck in me getting my first actual paying job. Right place, right time.
And how long ago was that, Joe?
96. Just
cool.
Shy of 20 years.
Oh, wow. 20 years of Visual Fox Pro, a career.
That would be awesome.
Is Visual Fox Pro a little bit like VBA or Microsoft Access, in spirit at least?
Probably closer to halfway between Access and SQL Server.
Okay.
It's more like a full programming language than Access is, and it has a kind of a database, a more production-worthy database behind it, but it's not like a big full database like SQL Server. So it was in a very weird position. There was a bunch of languages that evolved from it. Totally interesting story. Not germane.
How long were you doing that before you moved on to your next thing?
I don't know, year, 2 years.
Then what?
3 years, then VB.
Then
so
you went straight from that to ES6, right?
99 was VB. And then 2000 and 2001 was C#. Whenever the first year that C# came out, like we were using it in beta, we switched from VB to C#, the shop I was at.
You did that for quite a long time, right?
Almost
like a decade?
9 years, almost a decade.
Mm. What about you, Jamison? What was your path?
I took a computer science course my sophomore year of college. I liked it. I worked in a data entry job at this crappy tech company that kind of preyed on students by promising students who wanted to work as programmers that they would be able to, and then not letting them, and just kind of dangling it in front of them forever. So I worked there for a while, and then after that I became a webmaster at the computer science department, which is basically I just was a PHP developer on a Drupal site. And then after that I got my first, what I would consider real programming job off campus at this place called Spotter RF that makes radars, or they made radars. I don't really know if they're still around.
You were working with AJ there, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's where I met AJ. Yeah, so I took a class and liked it and then wanted to do it and was kind of on the outside looking in, trying to figure out how I could get into it for a while.
So what were you studying when you took that first computer science class?
Nothing. I was studying how do I figure out what to do with my life.
So you were a full-time college student at that point?
Yeah, I was a full-time college student. Yeah, I had a friend who just out of the blue was like, you might like this computer stuff. And so I took a class and I liked it.
And this was how long ago?
I don't know, 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. It's not super long ago.
Yeah, that's not long ago.
Yeah, I'm still pretty new to this whole thing. My most vivid memory of that class is sitting in the back, just staring at Java keywords and like not understanding what was going on at all. And then looking down to the front of the room, seeing this stupid kid just playing StarCraft because he knew everything already. Just sitting in the front row playing StarCraft. I don't know why he
front row.
Class,
man,
yeah,
he probably couldn't test out of it.
That's sad. So did that like impact your decision as you were moving forward? Like, did that discourage you?
No, because I felt like by the time the second level classes came along, everyone was kind of equal. There were probably some kids that were still far ahead, but if you had just kind of messed around with computers a little bit your whole life, you probably still hadn't done much of the second level class stuff. So it kind of evened out. I just felt dumb for a while, and then I felt like everyone was equally inexperienced in what we were actually doing.
So this is an interesting segue, and I know we're not finished with this conversation. I want to go around to everybody, but I'd like to at least bridge this topic just for a quick second, and that is I've read studies about going to really high-end universities and how that's usually detrimental, and it's not a good idea to go to the best universities in whatever program you're interested in. And the reason being is that you have a much higher percentage chance of going there and feeling dumb in something that you love and then dropping out.
Yeah, that was in Malcolm Gladwell's new book, right? David.
Yeah, that's right. It was. That's right. I forgot where I'd read that. So I think the same thing applies here. Whatever you do, whatever path you take, whether that's university, there are great low-level colleges out there, not the ones that are, the Caltechs or whatever, that are out there that will teach you just as good at programming. I've never once, in 20 years, I've interviewed a lot of people. Never once have I cared what school they went to. Didn't give a crap. I cared how well they interviewed. How well they solve problems and things like that. Never once gave a crap as to which university they went to. I don't care if they went to the MIT or the local community college. If they were a good programmer, they were, a good programmer. So if you're looking at university, don't go to the most expensive, most prestigious university just because you feel like that's going to give you your best chance of getting in the industry. Unless you're an overachiever, an Evan Sablicki or somebody, and you're going to invent a new language during your undergraduate, but you don't feel like that's a requirement to getting into the industry because it's really not.
Yeah, I've found that pedigree only matters if you're going into academia, because then they can. Yeah. Well, he graduated from Stanford with a PhD and a QRST, and he invented 6 programming languages.
It is, and now you are inadequate because you don't have it. Sorry, you missed it.
I actually do have a QRST. I just forgot to put it on my LinkedIn profile. I'll go and update that now.
I did have a similar situation to Jamison. I took a class at the university. It was my second computer science class, and I thought I could skip the first two. It was this back day and age. It was 201 and 202, and I thought I could skip 201, and I took 202 and flunked out of it, and I felt really dumb. And it was at a point where maybe I would have thought maybe I'm just not cut out for this. But fortunately, I'd had a lot of successes earlier on, where I felt really good and smart at programming, and so I kept with it. But those experiences where you feel like, oh, maybe I'm not cut out for that, you should ignore those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Well, to a point.
Wrinkle on the,
you should ignore them longer than you think you should ignore them.
One wrinkle on the college selection thing, too, is there's a difference between a college that's prestigious because they're a great research institution and a college that is a good teaching school.
Oh, that's so true.
Harvard doesn't care about teaching. They care about being famous, and they're famous because they have famous professors who are famous because they publish a lot. And teaching is a burden to them. They do not want to teach. Grad students teach at most colleges, and then there are some colleges where their focus is on teaching undergraduates, and they're very different experiences. And if you want to do research in academia and you love that kind of like life of the mind thing, then a research institution is great. If you just want to learn from people that really like teaching you and don't like resent you as time away from their actual job, and you do want to go to college, then you probably want to look at teaching colleges.
You can always go to a more prestigious university for your graduate level stuff and go.
Yeah, that's almost a bigger deal than going there as an undergrad if you do want to do academia.
Well, and I've known several people too that have gone to the community college, gotten an associate's degree in something related, and then they've transferred to the larger school and finished out a computer science or other degree.
The other smaller schools also could potentially be a lot more up to date in their curriculum.
Yeah.
So that matters too. So anyway, let's continue on around. How about you, Dave?
Okay. So when I was 18 years old, the time came to leave the home and go to college because that's what you do. And so I did and enrolled in a 4-year university in the mechanical engineering program. It was a decent school, and I absolutely, totally hated it. It was awful. I couldn't stand it. And after a year, I left on a 2-year church mission, which was a great time to reevaluate my life and think about what was important to me. And while I was there, I got to work in the mission office for a little while, which, of course, involved a little bit of computer work. And like surprisingly many developers today, I was exposed to Visual Basic. And as much as we like to make fun of Microsoft, especially the Microsoft of the 90s, I really do believe ushered in a whole generation of developers who were able to get over that barrier to entry by just doing a little bit of Visual Basic. So when I came back, I decided to change my major to computer science after simply reviewing the list of courses you had to take. And I was like just super excited by all these different concepts, data structures, databases, AI, robotics, all these really cool topics that I was just super excited to learn about. Got in and just totally fell in love, head over heels. 2.5 years later, I had my 4-year degree. So it was like, I guess I was about just a little bit shy of the 4-year mark total. And it's just been great. So unfortunately for me, and I think Joe maybe has some experience with this too. Joe, you got your first job in the late 90s, right? So kind of before the .com bubble, or probably just before it. Yep. I got out of school right after the .com bubble burst, and it was just an absolute nightmare. I had...
oh, really?
Yeah, I had my fresh computer science bachelor's degree in my hand, and I interviewed at like 7 different companies, and I only got 2 of them to call me back. And one of them that called me back, I was one of 200 applicants for this position.
Oh, wow.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, this is 2003, guys. This is not a long time ago. And I made my way through the interview process, a couple of different rounds, and there was like 3 of us that were going to be hired. And just by whatever lucky grace of who knows what, I got the job and started there, and turned out to be not a job I enjoyed working at. We were doing some government contracts, and it was Java, and I just didn't really like it. But your first job never has to be great. I learned that from there, is that even a crappy first job is a great job in the industry, because you'll learn so much stuff, even if it's you're learning stuff that you hate. And so then I got a job a year and a half after that at a much better place, where I worked for 7 years writing C++ code that was just wonderful. I worked with some of the most amazing smart people ever. But really for me, what came out of my college education was 3 things, I'd say. Number 1 was I learned how to learn for the first time in my life, like under high pressure, high volume learning, which was really good. Number 2, I got some really good computer science fundamentals, not to mention like life fundamentals, time management, getting exposed to a broad array of other subjects like biology and history and things that I just had never gone that deep into. But number 3, and maybe the most important thing, is some of my life's most cherished relationships were formed while I was in college, and people I still keep in touch with to this day, and even work with in some cases, were relationships I formed while there. It's like, when 2 of you are in like this fiery furnace of affliction together, it like forms a bond that sticks with you for life. And so to me, that's one of the most valuable things that came out of my 4-year college education, was these friendships that I have even today and just absolutely cherish. So that's something I still don't know how to get anywhere else.
That's a good point. I like that you brought that up.
So it's Amy's turn, right?
Well, I thought we kind of already know my story, but
give us a.
Let me tell your story as I remember it. So you were
once upon a time
through the woods, and you happened upon a magical frog that told you where the secret cave with the mystical sword was, and you drew it, and lightning
next thing you know,
struck
you were missing a kidney
from inside the cave, and then you heard, "You are now a developer." Echo, just the words echo throughout the cave, and then that's how it happened, right?
It was one of those Native American Indian sweat lodges, right?
I mean, there are some nuances that I haven't completely talked about that I can talk about for like 2 minutes really quick. So, like I had said, skating was really my life, and my parents didn't really push college. Like, they wanted me to go and just get that piece of paper, but no real reason to go. So that's why I did the degree I did. And then, because the plan was just to continue coaching the rest of my life. But I married my husband and was just kind of searching for my next passion. And I spent, like I was saying, some time taking the prerequisites and starting PT program. And that's kind of what turned me on to like science in general. But once it got to the clinical portion, I couldn't stand that portion. So decided it wasn't for me. That's when I started looking a long turn of events, but started exploring programming, encouraged by some developers that I was working with. Then started the IT program. Wasn't computer science. I just started with IT. But after doing that for 2 semesters, just decided to go the boot camp route because it seemed like the overwhelming amount of advice I was getting was to do that. So, in a perfect world, I would have preferred to go Dave's route, but that's the route I took.
It seems like a lot of it just depends on where you are in life. If you are 17
yeah, definitely,
and you have the means to go to college, I think oftentimes that's kind of you can do it without going to college at that age, but it feels like a more secure path. But if you're kind of working full time, or you have to support a family, or you have to pay rent or things like that, it can be hard to just check out of life for 4 years and go to school again.
Yeah, so true. And not only that, but even if you are 17 or 18, you're considering college, you can really pay way too much money.
Yes.
Yeah.
And oh man, I was so lucky, but the school I went to had a nice, inexpensive tuition. It was a fantastic return on the investment. I didn't have to take out student loans. I was able to work my way through school and start my job out of college without a pile of debt around my neck. If you're going to do college, that's one piece of advice I give everyone. Please don't go borrow $100,000 to get a bachelor's degree in computer science.
Yes, not worth it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, that will have a pretty decent financial return, but that's still forever to pay that back.
Yeah, I have to say, though, that, my college experience I don't know if I would have appreciated or gone the direction that I had if I hadn't gone through college. I started out, I did electronics and stuff in high school, and then, so when I went to college, I said, I want to be an electrical engineering major. And after I started taking computer science classes that were prerequisites for my major, I realized that I wanted to do something with computers, but I still really liked the hardware and stuff. And so I switched over to computer engineering. And I also wound up working IT for the university. I mentioned that before.
Yeah, me too. That's actually a really good opportunity universities provide.
Yeah. And so, I had a lot of different options. And so, as things went on, I actually got an internship writing patent applications, figured out pretty fast that I didn't want to be that kind of lawyer.
Or any kind for that matter.
I was on the student council for the engineering department, and I was on the ballroom dance team, and so I had these other things, where I explored other interests, and I just don't know that I would have had those opportunities if I hadn't gone to college. And so by the time I graduated, of course, it took me 6 years to graduate because I goofed around until I got married and had a kid, and then it was like, crap, I got to get this thing done. Then it was like, okay, what do I really want to do? And that's when I started looking at, okay, where am I going to get a job? Where am I going to, do all these things? And so I finished my degree. I think it helped me get my first job, but I don't think it was critical for me to get my first job out of college. And I actually wound up running a tech support department. I worked for them, or I worked there doing that for about 1.5 years. And I picked up programming there as well. And up until then, programming, it just felt like a way to build little toy apps. And I didn't take it seriously. And then we actually built an app that solved a problem, namely managing hundreds and hundreds of requests for help with the product every day. And there was just no other way around it because they weren't going to buy us software to do that stuff. That's how I kind of got into programming. And then I worked QA for 6 months, and then I moved from QA into programming. And I think I've told this story before, so I'm kind of summarizing. But I worked for several companies and then went freelance about 5 years ago. And, I think all of those experience kind of added up to, okay, I like this, I don't like this, I enjoy this, I don't enjoy that, I like this about this job, I don't like this about that job, and eventually, led me to be where I am now. And I think college does provide you kind of a safe place to figure out, okay, I really don't like my mechanical engineering classes, or I really don't enjoy my whatever else, I'm going to take some of these generals and figure out, okay, I don't want to be an English major, so then you can kind of figure out, okay, this is where I want to be and this is where I want to wind up. And then you can take the classes that are interesting to you. So I think there is that for college. Now, that being said, if somebody has a good deal of experience or something, I can also see where you might not need college.
Yeah. So let me tell you a few stories about that. So I'm friends with a lot of accountants for whatever reason. I've never met an accountant without a college degree. In fact, all the accountants I know have master's degrees in accounting. That's probably true for everybody here, right? I mean, of the accountants you know. But in our industry, I have worked with people with English majors, psychology majors, no degree at all. I've worked with one kid who's never even set foot in a school of any kind. He was 17 when we hired him. I've got another kid who's 17 right now as well. He's getting a math degree. Lots of people who have no degree, a little bit of high school, all high school.
Can I throw an anecdote in there?
Sure.
When I worked at the university in IT, we were supporting the servers that ran the web applications that were built by the programming team. And I kid you not, no less than half of that programming team had law degrees.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And so I don't know if I know of any other field that's considered like I'll use the term white collar. I hope that's not offensive, but I don't know of any other field that's white collar like software development where you have this much educational diversity. You guys have the same experience?
Yeah.
I don't think I've had that much educational diversity, but I probably haven't asked too many times.
Well, it usually shows up on somebody's resume, right? And so if you're hiring or, reviewing somebody's background, yeah, I agree. I mean, I've seen people from just graduated from college all the way up to have been doing it 20 years and never did go to school, to people that have been in it for a year or two. And a lot of them perform at the same level.
The story I love is Katrina Owen. I know this is a JavaScript show, but I don't know how many people are familiar with her, but she has a really unique background.
Tell.
I've seen some of her talks, but I don't know anything about her background.
Chuck probably knows about her pretty well, because I think she used to be a panelist on Ruby Rogues. But
she was, but go ahead. I'll let you tell it.
She was in, the circus, wasn't she? She was an acrobat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
spent a lot of time doing that, and then discovered programming, and she's, incredible.
An acrobat. Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Professionally trained.
English degree. What's your degree in? Acrobatics. A classically trained acrobat.
She was. She went to a program for it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Was it in Russia?
She probably, more than anyone else, qualifies the most as a ninja, because I bet a lot of those skills are the same.
So she can look at the billboards and honestly respond, I will apply for your job.
Yes, I could do a backflip and kick you in the face.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
But there's so many different backgrounds. And
there is.
In the boot camp I was in, it was interesting how many different people we had in there. We had an ex-lawyer, a lot of people without college, everything, ex-military.
It's a great time, and there seems to be no correlation between one particular educational background and success as a software developer, but there is one common thread that I have found that runs through all of the most talented, successful, happy software developers, and that is you have this certain passion for creating things, and especially, in a computer. So you have this you just love it. And it's if you're not thinking about anything else, your brain will wander toward this, after you have some experience with it. And that is what I tell people. If you're going to do a boot camp or you're going to go to get a computer science degree or something like that, number one thing you need to figure out as soon as possible is this really your passion? Because that is where you will be successful and happy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Up until a couple of months ago, I really would beat myself up a lot about my degree, but I've worked with some other juniors and have talked to some other juniors who have more traditional backgrounds, and it's so, like you're saying, Dave, it's, to me, so much less about your education and more so about your drive. I've just been very surprised to see people who I would expect them to, have a little bit more knowledge, but kind of their lack of drive kind of prevents them from advancing much as a junior.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned that about college specifically. If you do college in general, you learn a lot of life skills and kind of time management things like Dave said. If you do computer science in specific, you learn things, but very rarely do they apply to most of the day-to-day work you do. There's some good background information, but you can pick a lot of that up without needing to go to college. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that, while I think it's fascinating and I'm glad I learned it, I have not yet built a compiler or used AI or ever in any way had to analyze beyond counting for loops, the big O of an algorithm, or I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that you go way in depth on.
You don't know the big O analysis for every app you write?
It's one. It's all one.
Apps don't have
that good.
Yeah. See, and I've had a little bit of the opposite experience than Jamison here, and maybe this is because it's confirmation bias on my part where I say, oh, I enjoy computer science theory, therefore I see it in my work every day, as opposed to, I don't know, the opposite. But I see applications, maybe not every day, but often where I go, oh, I'm so glad I know that. And I have one really interesting anecdote about that. A good friend of mine had a computer science degree, worked for several years, and then decided to go back for a master's degree. And the reason he decided to go back is because he was really geeking out about programming language theory. And so, he was the kind of guy that writes Scheme for fun and just thought it was really cool. So he went back for his master's degree, and it took him like 6 or 7 years to get it. After he got it, he kept pointing out to me, he's like, hey, I just made a decision that I wouldn't have made if I hadn't gotten my master's degree. And it was like a very consequential decision about his code. And I was like, huh. And he kept pointing this out to me probably every week or two. He would point out these things. He's like, I never would have done this before my master's degree. And again, maybe it's confirmation bias. Like he spent a lot of money and time. So he's looking for opportunities to say it was valuable. But at the same time, it definitely influenced him. And, he to this day will say, I am definitely a different, and in his case, he says better engineer than I would have been had I not pursued more, computer science theoretical education. Yeah,
I think maybe I didn't make my point clearly enough. So I also have done kind of mostly web development stuff, which is I have not written a line of C++ code and been paid for it. So I think some of it you deal with different levels of abstraction that need different things. But also, I wasn't trying to say it's not useful. I was trying to say you can do a lot of stuff without needing to know it.
Yeah, totally.
And the things that you actually need to know for your day-to-day work, you can pick up through other people that have been to CS degrees or blog posts or things like that. There's a lot of resources out there. But I do agree that it can make your life better.
Yeah, and it's like it's one of those engineering trade-offs you have to make. You're like, is it worth 4 years of my time and a bunch of money to make me a incrementally better developer? As opposed to 0 years of my time or maybe 6 months of my time and very little money to be like almost as good developer. These are really hard trade-offs to make, especially when you're outside the industry, I think.
I guess the point I was trying to make too was like, I totally agree that if you can get a computer science degree, then that is really optimal. But if you have a computer science degree, but you don't have the motivation to stay sharp and keep learning, then I think you may come out behind somebody who does not have formal training because it might not even be the case. It depends on the field that you're working in. But if you're working in web technologies, if you don't have that drive, then that computer science degree, how useful is it going to be? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a great point.
True.
Mm-hmm. So it's maybe like 10% helpful and effort is like 90%. I don't know what the percentages are, but yeah.
It is like that. So at my last job, I interviewed, I can't remember the math. I think I interviewed 400, 500 candidates while I was there in like 7 years. And we started to see patterns. And one of the patterns we saw was that a master's degree in computer science would actually hurt most candidates. And the reason was they would come to us and interview and we would expect them to be really good. It's like you just spent 6 years at least studying computer science. And so we would ask them like computer science questions. And it's almost like the extra 2 years had hurt them in many cases, as far as like being able to be a real practical hands-on contributing member of our software development team for building products. And it was just the strangest phenomenon, but we saw it time and time again. And not in all cases, but again, this goes back to the point, like there seems to be no correlation between your educational background and your, like the predictive power of your educational background and the success you'll have.
I think Google actually wrote some stuff in a blog about this once where they did studies internally, and I don't think it was looking at specific schools. I think it was just GPA, and they found that GPA had no correlation on how well they performed at the company.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I would echo to some extent some of the concepts or things you talk about especially Jamison, about a lot of the classic computer science stuff you don't use in typical business programming. You can, and there are opportunities for it. So I didn't get a degree. In the first 15 or so years, I didn't know any of the classical computer science stuff. I mean, I knew what a linked list was, et cetera. But then I wanted to get a job at Google. And their software engineering interview is heavy on the classics of computer science. So I spent like 300 or 400 hours studying algorithms and data structures. And at the end of it, I did a lot better in my interview, and I ended up not getting a job. But 2 or 3 years later, I've used that stuff so infrequently that I've lost a lot of what I had learned in that time frame.
You mean you didn't rebalance an AVL tree in your Angular app?
I didn't. Now, granted, the types of apps that I work on are not the types of apps, the stuff that they work on at Google with search and ads and stuff.
Yeah, I want them
matters.
to know how to balance an AVL tree. But
Right. Yeah, they really need to know. But it's a lot more important as a typical business programmer to be able to prototype rapidly and write soft. There is definitely a trade-off between performance and algorithms and readability. And sometimes it's a significant trade-off and sometimes it's a minor or nearly no trade-off. So a performant algorithm may not be any less readable than a non-performant one. But oftentimes performant ones can be. And you write apps where for the most part performance doesn't make sense. And certainly optimizing prematurely is a bad idea.
I should dig up the old syllabuses from my old classes and go through each concept and just put like a check mark next to the ones that I've used in the last 5 years. And then I could actually like say definitively, like I actually use this stuff or not,
Right.
I think for me, the most practically helpful things have been networking and operating systems, because it's really nice to know how things kind of work under the layer of abstraction that you're working in. I remember programming before that, and it's just this vague feeling of you're floating on a sea of magic. And no one understands how their computer actually works. But the feeling like you can understand it is kind of powerful and feels cool.
Yeah.
Now,
the other thing I got out of a degree, though, is the discipline, and we've talked about that before. So not everything you're going to get out of your degree is necessarily the concepts.
Right. And let me say that I do love data structures and algorithms. I find them fascinating, and I think it's something that people should know. But you, as a typical business programmer, you use it very infrequently. I think they are good things to know, but I just think you use them very infrequently.
I started trying to write my own database a couple months ago. No one should ever use it and no one ever will. But I just wanted to know more about how they worked internally. And that was the first time in post-college life that I felt like, okay, yeah, I need to go Google B-trees again and figure out how these things beyond objects and arrays work and how to write them and stuff. And there are lots of people that do work like that, but I don't work with them. And that's not the kind of work my job involves.
Now, one thing that's interesting, though, is interviews typically involve solving some kind of a program, right?
That's because interviews are the worst.
Yes, interviews are terrible. Most people interview terribly. And so in that case, you actually do need to know, data structures and algorithms in most cases when they give you the interview problem. Right? It actually matters. But then you get a job and they don't really care that you apply that same knowledge as you program.
There's this hilarious webcomic where they have this interviewee going through this terrible, difficult programming challenge in the interview. And then it says, fast forward to day one on the job. Our designer wants this button 5 pixels to the left.
So true.
Yep.
However, I will say that these interview questions, people do them, and I do them, I give them, I've received them. Sometimes it's not so much